Some marriages are built on love. Others are built on lies. Jaewon-seo's marriage was supposed to be built on power, a strategic alliance to repair his brutal reputation and secure international connections. He signed the contract expecting a partner in pretense, not a person. But when Tasha Bailey walked into his life in a white lace gown, trembling like a hunted creature, everything he thought he knew shattered. She wasn't the calculating socialite he'd imagined. She was terrified, fragile, and carrying a secret so devastating it would break him before their wedding night even ended. This is the story of how a mafia boss learned that the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun, it's a woman with nothing left to lose. Before we dive into Jaewon and Tasha's story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you love intense mafia romance with unexpected twists, hit that subscribe button. We're building a community of story lovers here. The day she arrived, the air in the CO penthouse shifted. Jaewon stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his private study, the Seoul skyline glittering like scattered diamonds behind him. His reflection in the glass showed what the world feared: sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that missed nothing, and intricate tattoos snaking up his neck from beneath his tailored collar. He was a weapon dressed in Tom Ford. Tasha Bailey didn't stride into his world. She was escorted, guided like a fragile package through the marble hallways by stone-faced men in black suits. Jaewon watched from above, his eyes narrowing with each step she took. She was smaller than he'd anticipated, her shoulders curved inward as if trying to make herself disappear. Her white lace gown, traditional, elegant, expensive, seemed to swallow her whole. Dark curls framed a face he couldn't quite see from this angle. But he caught the way she kept her head down, her movements hesitant. This was not what he'd paid for. His lieutenants had assured him the Jamaican connection was solid. An old family with deep roots, a daughter raised to understand duty and discretion. They'd shown him a photograph. A beautiful woman with confident eyes and a practiced smile. But the girl being led through his home looked nothing like that image. She looked like prey walking into a predator's den. Annoyance flared hot in his chest. He'd signed the contract in good faith. This alliance was supposed to stabilize relations with the Caribbean networks, repair his reputation after the bloody coup that made him boss. He needed a partner who could handle the scrutiny, the danger, the performance of being his wife. Instead, he was getting... what? A frightened girl who flinched at shadows? Their first meeting was orchestrated with precision. The grand hall, all dark wood and cold marble, had been prepared like a stage. His men lined the walls, silent sentinels in expensive suits, their presence designed to intimidate. Jaewon stood in the center, a mountain of controlled power in black silk, his hands clasped behind his back. When Tasha was brought before him, she kept her eyes locked on the polished floor. He could see her chest rising and falling too quickly, her breath shallow and panicked. Her hands, delicate and trembling, were clasped protectively over her stomach in a gesture that struck him as odd. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice low and cutting the same tone that made grown men confess their sins. She flinched. The movement was small, almost imperceptible, but Jaewon caught it. Slowly, as if every second cost her something precious, she lifted her gaze. Her eyes were dark brown, warm like melted chocolate, and utterly terrified. There was no calculation in those eyes, no strategic assessment, no hidden agenda, just pure, unguarded fear, the kind that couldn't be faked. It threw him completely. This was no seasoned player. This wasn't even a willing participant. This was a scared woman who looked at him like he was death itself. The wedding was a performance for the underworld elite. The cathedral was packed with men who smiled with their mouths but calculated with their eyes. Jaewon played his role flawlessly, the powerful, slightly bored groom claiming his prize. But when he took Tasha's hand to slide the ring onto her finger, he felt it. A tremor. Constant. Uncontrollable. Her hand shook in his like a trapped bird, her skin ice-cold despite the warmth of the crowded church. She kept her eyes downcast, her long lashes casting shadows on her brown cheeks. When she recited her vows, her voice was barely a whisper, so faint he had to lean closer to hear her. Her breath hitched on the word forever, as if the promise itself might kill her. Something twisted in his chest. Something unwelcome and uncomfortable. This was wrong. The reception blurred past in a haze of champagne toasts and false congratulations. Tasha stood beside him like a beautiful statue, her white gown flowing around her like water. She didn't eat. She barely touched her wine. Her eyes never stopped scanning the room, as if looking for an escape route that didn't exist. Jaewon found his attention constantly pulled back to her. His initial annoyance was slowly being replaced by something sharper: confusion mixed with an unwanted curiosity. Who was this woman? Why had they sent someone so clearly unprepared, and why did she look at him like he was a monster? Finally, after hours of performance, the last guests filtered out. The heavy doors of his private wing closed with a soft final click. They were alone. The penthouse suite was vast and silent, city lights painting gold across the dark furniture. Tasha stood frozen in the center of the room, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her breathing rapid and shallow. She looked like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting to fall. Jaewon poured himself whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light as he swirled it in the crystal glass. He studied her over the rim, his mind calculating, assessing. This was the moment the contract specified. This was the transaction to be completed. This was how alliances were sealed in his world. "This is how it will be," he said, his tone flat and businesslike. He set the glass down with a sharp click that made her jump. "You are my wife in name. Now you will be my wife in truth. It is part of our agreement." He moved toward her not with desire, but with purpose. In his world, you took what was yours. Hesitation was weakness. As he got closer, the fear in her eyes didn't just grow. It consumed her. Her whole body began to shake, her breath coming in quick, desperate pants. She stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the sofa, her eyes wide and glassy with terror. "Please," she whispered, the word breaking apart in her throat. "Please what?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. He stopped directly in front of her, his tall frame blocking out the city lights behind him. He reached out not to hurt her, but to pull her closer, to get this obligation over with so they could both move on with their lives. The moment his fingers touched her bare arm, she gasped and squeezed her eyes shut, her whole body going rigid as if bracing for a blow. A single tear escaped, tracing a shining path down her brown cheek, and in that heartbeat, Jaewon saw everything. He saw the way she trembled at his simple touch. He saw genuine terror, not the fear of a woman playing games, but the fear of someone who had never been touched with anything but violence or threat. He saw the way her hands instinctively moved to protect her stomach, curving over it in a gesture that was both defensive and tender, protective. The pieces began clicking into place, each one hitting him like a physical blow. Her trembling during the ceremony, her refusal to eat, the way she kept her hands over her stomach, the genuine, bone-deep fear that no actress could fake. His eyes dropped to where her hands rested, noticing for the first time the slight curve beneath the white lace of her gown. His blood turned to ice. "Tasha," he said slowly, his voice changing, losing its edge. "Look at me." She shook her head, tears streaming freely now, her whole body shaking. "Look at me," he repeated, but this time it wasn't a command. It was almost gentle. Slowly, she opened her eyes, those deep brown eyes now swimming with tears and something else. Shame, desperation, and underneath it all, a plea. "Are you?" He couldn't even finish the question. His hand, still on her arm, had gone completely still. Her breath hitched, her lips trembled. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she destroyed his entire world. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was deafening. Jaewon's hand dropped from her arm as if burned. He took a step back, then another, his mind reeling. Pregnant. She was pregnant. His bride, the woman he'd just married in front of half of Seoul's criminal elite, was carrying another man's child. Betrayal slammed into him first, hot and vicious. Then confusion. Then something darker, a humiliation so profound it made his vision blur. He'd been played, tricked, made a fool of, in the most fundamental way. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. Blood roared in his ears. The rational part of his mind, the part that had kept him alive in a world where weakness meant death, screamed at him to respond with violence, to punish, to destroy. But when he looked at her again, all he saw was a woman collapsing under the weight of her own secret. She had sunk to her knees on the floor, her white gown pooling around her like sea foam, her hands still protectively wrapped around her stomach, sobbing so hard her whole body convulsed. She wasn't deceiving him. She was terrified of him. The rage that had built inside him collided with something else, something foreign and uncomfortable. For the first time in his adult life, Jae-won-seo felt the sharp, unwelcome sting of uncertainty. He turned away from her, his breath coming hard, his tattooed hands shaking with emotions he didn't have names for. 2 steps. 3. Then his fist connected with the wall once, twice, 3 times until his knuckles split and blood ran down his fingers. The pain felt right, clearer than the chaos in his head. Behind him, Tasha's sobs grew quieter, but more desperate, like she was trying to disappear into the floor itself. Jae-won looked down at his bleeding hand, at the crimson dripping onto the white marble, and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He didn't turn around. He didn't speak. He simply walked to the bedroom door, pulled it open, and paused with his hand on the frame, the same position of power and control he'd held 1,000 times before. But this time, everything was different. "Sleep," he said, his voice rough and strained, barely recognizable as his own. "The room is yours. I won't touch you tonight." Then he stepped through and pulled the door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Tasha alone in the vast, silent room, more confused and shocked than she'd been all day. The contract that had seemed so clear and absolute now felt like a chain around both their necks, and neither of them knew what would happen when the sun rose. The silence after her confession was deadly. Jae-won stood frozen, his entire world tilting on its axis. Pregnant, the word echoed in his skull like a gunshot in an empty room. His bride, the woman he'd just sworn vows to in front of Seoul's most powerful criminals, was carrying another man's child. The rational part of his mind screamed for action, for punishment, for the kind of swift, brutal response that had built his reputation. But when he looked at Tasha, still crumpled on the floor in her white gown, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe, something else took hold. Not anger, something worse. Betrayal sliced through him. Yes, but underneath it was humiliation so profound it made his vision blur. He'd been played, made a fool. His advisors, his contacts, someone in the chain had deceived him, and now he stood in his own penthouse with a pregnant stranger who flinched every time he moved. "How long?" His voice came out rough, barely controlled. She shook her head, unable to answer through her tears. "How long?" Each word was a blade. 3 months, she whispered, her Jamaican accent thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. 3 months." She'd stood at that altar, recited those vows, let him slip a ring onto her trembling finger, all while hiding another man's child. The deception burned like acid in his chest. His hands clenched into fists so tight his nails cut into his palms. He needed to hit something, needed to break something, needed to release the chaos building inside him before it consumed him entirely. He spun away from her and slammed his fist into the wall. Once, twice, 3 times. The plaster cracked. Blood bloomed across his knuckles, hot and wet. The pain felt clean, sharp, real, something he could understand in a moment where nothing else made sense. Behind him, Tasha's sobs grew quieter but more desperate, like she was trying to make herself disappear. "Please," she whispered. "Please don't." "Don't what?" he snarled, whirling to face her. Blood dripped from his hand onto the white marble floor, each drop a scarlet accusation. "Don't what, Tasha? Don't be angry that my wife is pregnant with another man's baby? Don't feel betrayed? Don't demand answers?" She flinched at his tone, curling tighter around her stomach, protective even in her terror. That gesture so instinctive, so maternal, cut through his rage like a knife. She wasn't protecting herself. She was protecting her child. From him. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This woman, barely more than a stranger, looked at him and saw a monster. Someone who would hurt an innocent baby out of spite or pride. Someone capable of that level of cruelty. Was that who he was? Is that what he'd become? His entire empire was built on intimidation, on making men fear him more than they feared death itself. But standing here, watching this terrified woman cradle her pregnant belly while blood dripped from his knuckles, Jae-won felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Shame. He took a step back, then another. His breathing was ragged, his tattooed chest heaving beneath his open shirt. Every instinct screamed at him to demand explanations, to uncover who had dared to deceive him, to punish everyone involved. But her fear gutted him. Instead of forcing answers, he stepped away. Instead of rage, he chose restraint. Instead of dominance, he surrendered to the emotional chaos tearing him apart. "I'm leaving," he said, his voice hoarse. "You have the room. No one will disturb you." He walked to the door, his bloody hand leaving crimson prints on the frame. He paused, his back to her, unable to look at her tear-stained face again without breaking completely. "Lock the door if it makes you feel safer," he added quietly. Then he was gone, pulling the door shut behind him with a soft click that felt louder than any gunshot. In the hallway, 2 of his men straightened immediately, their eyes widening at the blood running down his hand and the barely controlled violence in his expression. "No one enters that room," Jae-won commanded, his voice deadly calm. "No one speaks to her. No one even looks in that direction. If I find out anyone has disturbed her, I'll personally break every bone in their body. Understood?" "Yes, boss," they said in unison, their faces carefully blank. Jaewon walked down the corridor, his bloody hand leaving a trail behind him. He didn't head to his study or his office. Instead, he went to the room he'd occupied before the wedding, the cold, impersonal space that had been his sanctuary for years. He stood at the window. Seoul's glittering lights spread before him like a kingdom he no longer understood. His reflection stared back, tattooed, bloodied, and utterly lost. For the first time in his adult life, the boss who had built an empire on intimidation and fear found himself completely undone, not by an enemy's bullet, not by a rival's betrayal, but by a single pregnant woman in a white dress who looked at him like he was death itself. And the worst part? He couldn't even blame her for being afraid. Tasha woke to silence. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back: the wedding, the penthouse, the confession, Jaewon's bleeding knuckles, and the deadly silence that followed. She sat up slowly, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. The baby shifted beneath her palm, a gentle reminder that she wasn't alone. She'd expected violence last night, expected punishment, expected him to throw her out or worse. Instead, he'd walked away. The confusion was almost worse than fear would have been. Morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting gold across the luxurious room. Everything was untouched: the bed she'd finally collapsed into around 3 a.m, the bathroom with its marble and gold fixtures, the closet filled with clothes she hadn't chosen. No one had come for her. No one had disturbed her. The door, which she'd locked with shaking hands, remained closed and secure. She'd been left alone. A soft knock made her jump. "Mrs. Seo?" A woman's voice, gentle and respectful. "Breakfast is ready when you are. I've left clothes outside your door." Tasha waited until the footsteps retreated before cracking the door open. A simple but elegant outfit lay folded on a chair, comfortable pants, and a loose top that would accommodate her growing belly, not the restrictive, formal things she'd been forced into yesterday. Someone had been paying attention. 30 minutes later, dressed and as composed as she could manage, Tasha made her way to the dining room. Her hands trembled as she pushed open the door. Jaewon sat at the head of a long table, a cup of coffee in his unbandaged hand. He'd changed into fresh clothes, black shirt, black pants, looking every inch the dangerous man he was. But his face was different. The cold fury from last night had been replaced by something more controlled, more distant. He looked up when she entered, his dark eyes sweeping over her in assessment. Not possessive, not angry, just observing. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair. Not beside him, but close enough to talk. Tasha obeyed, her heart hammering. A staff member appeared immediately, placing food in front of her: fresh fruit, pastries, eggs, prepared the way she actually liked them. How did they know? "Eat," Jaewon said. It wasn't a command, just a statement. She picked up her fork with shaking hands, taking small bites while he watched. Not staring, but studying her like she was a puzzle he needed to solve. "Why did you agree to marry me?" he asked finally, his voice carefully neutral. "If you were already pregnant, why come to Korea?" Tasha set down her fork, her appetite gone. "I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. Not when your family is threatened." The words came out sharper than she intended. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Explain. She wanted to. God, part of her wanted to tell him everything about her father's kidnapping, about the men who'd threatened her baby, about the impossible choice she'd been forced to make. But the words stuck in her throat, choked by fear and exhaustion. "I can't," she whispered. "Can't or won't. Both." Silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Jaewon took a slow sip of his coffee, his bandaged hand resting on the table, a visible reminder of last night's violence. "A doctor will come this afternoon," he said finally, "to confirm the pregnancy and make sure you're healthy." Terror spiked through her. "Why?" "Because if you're carrying a child, I need to know the truth. All of it. You think I'm lying?" The accusation hurt more than it should have. "I think," he said slowly, carefully, "that nothing about this marriage has been what it seemed. I think you're terrified of me for reasons I don't fully understand. And I think someone has put you in an impossible situation." His words were too close to the truth. Tasha looked away, blinking back tears. "The doctor will be discreet," Jaewon continued. "He's loyal to me, and he'll tell no one what he finds. You have my word." His word. What did that mean in a world like his? The doctor arrived at 2 p.m, an older man with kind eyes and gentle hands. He conducted the examination in her room with Jaewon waiting outside. When he emerged, she heard their low voices through the door. 3 months, as she said. "The baby is healthy." "She is." considerably stressed. A pause. Then Jaewon's voice, barely audible. "And there's no doubt? About the pregnancy?" "None. She's telling the truth, Mr. Seo." Tasha sat on the edge of the bed, her hands pressed to her stomach, waiting for the fallout. But when Jaewon finally entered, he didn't look angry. He looked grief-stricken. "You really are pregnant," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "I told you I was. I know. He ran his good hand through his dark hair, the gesture so human it startled her. "I needed to be sure. She didn't lie. She didn't fake it. She really was carrying another man's child." The reality of it settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Jaewon looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he did something unexpected. He sat down in the chair across from her. Not looming, not intimidating, just sitting. "I won't hurt you," he said finally. "Or your baby. Whatever else happens, you need to know that." Tasha wanted to believe him, but trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. That night, unable to sleep, Jaewon sat in his security office, watching footage from the cameras positioned throughout the penthouse. He told himself he was protecting her, watching for threats. But really, he was trying to understand. He watched her move through the hallways like a ghost, avoiding the servants, speaking to no one. He watched her cry in the bathroom, her sobs muffled by running water. He watched her sit in the garden, one hand on her belly, whispering to the baby growing inside her. "I'll keep you safe," she murmured to her unborn child. "I promise, whatever it takes." The devotion in her voice, the fierce protectiveness, it reminded him of something, of the way his own mother had looked at him before she died, before this world took everything soft and gentle and destroyed it. Tasha wasn't hiding a pregnancy. She was hiding something much bigger, and Jaewon So intended to uncover it, no matter what it cost. Jaewon summoned the men who'd arranged the marriage at dawn. They filed into his office with confident smiles, clearly expecting praise for securing the Jamaican alliance. Instead, they found their boss sitting behind his desk with cold, deadly eyes and questions that cut like knives. "Tell me about Tasha Bailey's family," he said without preamble. Park, his senior advisor, blinked. "Sir? Her family, her background, everything you verified before arranging this marriage." "Of course." Park pulled out a folder, his movements smooth and practiced. "The Bailey family has deep roots in Kingston. Her father, John Bailey, has connections to several import-export businesses, some legitimate, some less so. The family fell on hard times financially, which made them amenable to the arrangement." "Amenable," Jaewon repeated, his voice flat. "What debts did John Bailey owe?" "Approximately $2 million, sir. Gambling debts, primarily. Some poor business investments. We offered to clear everything in exchange for the marriage alliance." Too smooth, too rehearsed. Jaewon had interrogated enough men to know when he was being fed a prepared story. "And you verified all of this personally?" A fraction of hesitation. "We worked through intermediaries, sir. The Jamaican networks have their own protocols." "Intermediaries?" Jaewon leaned forward, his tattooed hands flat on the desk. "Give me names." Park rattled off a list of contacts, each one sounding more legitimate than the last. But something was wrong. Jaewon could feel it in his gut, that instinct that had kept him alive through a dozen assassination attempts. "Dismissed," he said coldly. "But Park, I want every document, every communication, every piece of paper related to this arrangement on my desk by tomorrow morning. Everything." After they left, Jaewon sat in silence, his mind working through the pieces. Nothing about this marriage made sense. Why would a family in debt send their pregnant daughter across the world? Why hide the pregnancy if the marriage was meant to be legitimate? Unless the pregnancy was the point. The thought chilled him. Meanwhile, Tasha was discovering that her new prison had unexpected freedoms. Jaewon didn't confine her to her room. He didn't restrict her movements within the penthouse. In fact, when she tentatively emerged that morning, he'd merely gestured for one of his men to show her around. "The garden is through there," her escort said, his voice respectful. "The library is on the 3rd floor. Kitchen staff will prepare anything you request. Mr. Seo says you're free to go wherever you wish within the residence." "I can. Go anywhere?" The concept felt foreign. "Yes, ma'am." It was more freedom than she'd had in months. She found herself drawn to the garden, a surprisingly lush space carved into the penthouse's expansive terrace. Real grass, real trees, the scent of jasmine and roses mixing with Seoul's city air. She sat on a bench beneath a cherry tree, her hand resting on her belly, and for the first time since arriving in Korea, She felt something close to peace. "You like it?" she startled. Jaewon stood a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "It's beautiful," she admitted. "My mother planted the first cherry tree," he said, moving closer but maintaining a respectful distance. "Before she died. I've kept it alive ever since." There was pain in those words, old and deep. Tasha found herself looking at him differently, not just as the terrifying Mafia boss, but as a man who'd lost his mother and tended her garden for years in her memory. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "For what?" "For your loss." He looked surprised, as if kindness from her was the last thing he'd expected. "Thank you." They stood in silence, the city humming around them. Tasha noticed details she'd missed before, the way his tattoos snaked up his neck in intricate patterns, the scar above his left eyebrow, the way he held himself with controlled tension, like a weapon always ready. But around her, that tension eased slightly. His voice, when he spoke, was gentler than it had been. "I won't hurt you," he said again, as if trying to convince both of them. "Whatever brought you here, whatever secrets you're carrying, I won't hurt you because of them." Tasha's throat tightened. "Why not?" "Because you're terrified enough already." He turned to face her fully, his dark eyes intense. "And because last night, when I thought about proceeding with what was expected, all I could see was my mother. What men like me did to women like her." The honesty in his voice cracked something in her chest. "This marriage wasn't my choice," she whispered, the truth slipping out before she could stop it. Jaewon went very still. "What do you mean?" "I mean..." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm afternoon. "I mean, I didn't want this. Any of this." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Jaewon's jaw tightened, his hands clenching at his sides. But he didn't move toward her, didn't demand more. "There's more," he said quietly. "Isn't there? More you're not telling me?" She nodded, tears pricking her eyes. "But I can't or too afraid to." "Both." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "When you're ready, then?" "I'll wait." That night, while Tasha slept, Jaewon made calls to his contacts in Jamaica. What he discovered made his blood run cold. John Bailey's debts weren't random. They'd been engineered over 6 months through a series of rigged card games and sabotaged business deals. Someone had systematically destroyed the Bailey family finances, creating a debt so massive they'd have no choice but to accept any offer of help. Someone had wanted Tasha desperate. Someone had wanted her in Korea. But the biggest shock came from his most trusted investigator's final report. "Boss, there's something else." Tasha Bailey's pregnancy, we traced the timeline. She got pregnant right around the time her father's debts started mounting. And the father? No name, no record. It's like he never existed. Jaewon stared at the report, his mind racing. Someone had engineered the debts. Someone had wanted a pregnant woman placed in his home. But why? What was the endgame? The pieces were there, scattered and incomplete. But Jaewon Seo was a man who'd built an empire on reading patterns, on seeing threats before they materialized. And every instinct he possessed screamed that Tasha Bailey wasn't the enemy. She was bait. The question was, bait for what trap? If you're wondering what happens next, you're not alone. This story is just getting started. Hit that like button if you're Team Jaewon, and drop a comment telling me, do you think he made the right choice? Subscribe so you don't miss what happens when the truth fully comes out. 3 days after the wedding, Jaewon found Tasha on the balcony. She stood with her hands on the railing, the Seoul skyline glittering before her like scattered diamonds, her loose dress catching the evening breeze. She looked small against the vast city, vulnerable in a way that made something in his chest tighten. He'd been investigating nonstop, calling in favors, threatening contacts, piecing together the conspiracy that had placed her in his home. And with each new piece of information, his rage grew not at her, but at the men who'd used her. "Tasha," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, her eyes widening slightly. "You're back." He'd been gone since morning, tracking down the Jamaican intermediaries. What he'd found had confirmed his worst suspicions. "We need to talk," he said. Fear flickered across her face, but she nodded. He moved to stand beside her at the railing, close enough to talk but far enough to not crowd her. "I know about the debts," he said quietly. "I know they were engineered. I know someone set up your father deliberately." She went very still. "I know you were forced into this marriage," he continued. "What I don't know is why. Why you specifically? Why a pregnant woman? What do they want?" Tasha's hands gripped the railing so hard her knuckles went pale. "You'll hate me when you know." "Try me." She was silent for a long moment, the city breathing around them. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. They took my father. Jaewon's blood turned to ice. When? A week before the wedding. Men came to our house. They said the debts were due, that there was no more time. Then they took him. Her voice broke. They said if I refused to marry you, they'd kill him. If I told you the truth, they'd kill him. If I did anything except exactly what they said, they'd kill him. Jaewon finished, his voice hard as steel. She nodded, tears streaming down her face now. They knew about the baby, they said. They said if I didn't cooperate, they'd kill my baby too. That they'd cut it out of me and make sure I watched before they killed my father. Rage, pure, white-hot rage flooded through Jaewon, the kind of rage that made men disappear, that burned entire organizations to the ground. Who? He demanded. Who threatened you? I don't know their names. They had Jamaican accents, but they spoke Korean too. They knew everything about you, your schedule, your security, your business. They knew exactly what to say to make me believe they could do it. And the baby's father? She flinched. There is no father. Not really. Explain. Tasha took a shuddering breath. 3 months ago, I was drugged at a club. I don't remember what happened. I woke up in a hotel room alone, and 2 weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. She wrapped her arms around her stomach protectively. By the time I realized, by the time I even thought about what to do, they came for my father. The full picture crystallized in Jaewon's mind with horrifying clarity. They'd orchestrated everything. The drugging, the pregnancy, the debts, the threats. They'd created a pregnant, desperate woman and placed her in his home like a bomb waiting to detonate. They wanted me to reject you, he said slowly, working through the logic. A pregnant bride would humiliate me, make me look weak, and when I threw you out because that's what they expected, I'd be politically vulnerable. I'm so sorry, Tasha sobbed. I didn't want to deceive you. I didn't want any of this. But they have my father, and I couldn't let them hurt my baby. Stop. He turned to her, his voice rough but not angry. Stop apologizing. But you did what any mother would do. What any daughter would do. You protected the people you love. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently lifted her chin, so she had to meet his eyes. That doesn't make you guilty. That makes them monsters. Hope and disbelief warred in her expression. You're not angry? Oh, I'm furious, he said, and she flinched. But not at you. At the bastards who did this. At the men who hurt you, who threatened your child, who used your father as leverage. They said you'd kill me when you found out. They were wrong. The words came out fierce, almost violent in their intensity. No one will touch you or your child again. I promise you. On my life, on my name, on everything I've built, no one will hurt you. Tasha stared at him, searching his face for lies, for deception. But all she saw was furious conviction. Why? She whispered. Why would you protect me after what I've done? Because you haven't done anything except survive. He released her chin but didn't step away. And because I understand what it's like to have no good choices. To be backed into a corner by people who hold all the power. But I'm carrying another man's child. Your men. Your reputation. Fuck my reputation, he said, the vulgarity shocking them both. And fuck anyone who thinks I should punish you for being a victim. For the first time since arriving in Korea, Tasha felt something shift inside her. Not quite trust that would take time, but belief. She believed he meant what he said. My father, she whispered. They still have him. Not for long. Jaewon's voice turned cold, deadly. I'm going to find every single person involved in this. I'm going to get your father back. And then I'm going to make them regret ever using you as a weapon against me. They'll kill him if they know you're looking. They won't know. I didn't build an empire by being careless. He pulled out his phone, already typing commands. I have people in Jamaica, contacts they don't know about. We'll find him. And then what? They'll just try again. Then I'll destroy them so completely there won't be anyone left to try. He looked at her, his dark eyes burning with fierce protectiveness. You're under my protection now, Tasha. You and your baby both. That means something in my world. That means I'll burn down anyone who threatens you. She wanted to collapse into him, to let go of the fear she'd been carrying for months. But years of survival kept her upright. I don't understand, she said. Why would you do this for me? For a baby that isn't even yours? Jaewon was quiet for a moment, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. Because I know what it's like to be a child born into violence, to carry the weight of other people's wars before you can even walk. And because He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his face. Because when I look at you, I don't see a trap. I see someone who deserves better than the hand they've been dealt. Tasha felt the tears come again, but this time they weren't from fear. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when your father is safe and the people who did this are dead. For the first time since her world had shattered 3 months ago, Tasha Bailey felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. The change didn't happen overnight, but it happened. The morning after their balcony conversation, Tasha woke to find her belongings being moved not out of the penthouse, but to a different room. Larger, brighter, with windows that overlooked the garden and security measures she could actually see. Mr. Seo's orders, the staff member explained. This room is in the most secure part of the residence. He wants you comfortable. Comfortable. The word felt foreign, but it was more than that. 2 of Jae-won's most trusted men now shadowed her whenever she left her room, not as jailers, but as protectors. She heard him giving them explicit instructions. If anyone so much as looks at her wrong, you break their legs. If anyone approaches her without my permission, you put them in the ground. Understood? Yes, boss. Tasha had lived in fear for so long, she'd forgotten what protection felt like. Jae-won personally screened her meals after discovering that one of the kitchen staff had connections to a Jamaican syndicate. The woman was gone within hours, replaced by someone Jae-won trusted implicitly. You can't be too careful, he said when Tasha questioned the extreme measures. These people have already proven they'll use any opening. I won't give them another one. But the most surprising changes were the small ones. The chef who appeared one morning, a Jamaican woman with kind eyes and recipes that tasted like home. Mr. Seo said you might be missing familiar food, she explained, serving Tasha ackee and saltfish that made her cry. The books that appeared in her room, novels by Caribbean authors, stories about women who survived impossible things. The way Jae-won walked with her in the garden each evening, matching his long strides to her slower pace, never rushing, never demanding she keep up. Tell me about Jamaica, he said one evening as they walked beneath the cherry trees. Tasha glanced at him, surprised. Why? Because it's your home. Because I want to understand where you came from. So she told him, about Kingston's heat and chaos, about her father's laugh and her mother's gardens, about the house by the sea where she'd grown up dreaming of a life that didn't involve violence or fear. It sounds beautiful, Jae-won said quietly. It was. Before they destroyed it. His voice hardened. We'll get it back. Your father, your home, all of it. She wanted to believe him. Day by day, the fear that had defined her existence began to crack. She found herself looking for him in the mornings, listening for his footsteps in the hallway. She noticed small things, the way he always checked to make sure she'd eaten, the way he spoke to her baby bump when he thought she wasn't listening. I don't know if you can hear me, she overheard him say one afternoon when she dozed off in the garden. But your mother is the bravest person I've ever met, and I'm going to make sure you never have to be that brave. You'll be safe. I promise. The tenderness in his voice undid something in her chest. One evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the sunset, Tasha did something she never thought she'd do. She reached for his hand. Jae-won froze, his entire body going still. Slowly, carefully, as if she were made of glass, he turned his hand over and let her fingers intertwine with his. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just existing together in the quiet. Thank you, she whispered finally. For what? For not being the monster they told me you were. His hand tightened around hers. I am a monster. Tasha, don't mistake kindness to you for goodness. I've done terrible things. I know. She did know she'd heard the whispers, seen the fear in people's eyes when they spoke his name. But you're not a monster to me. Something shifted in his expression, vulnerable and raw. I don't know how to be anything else. Maybe you don't have to be anything, she said softly. Maybe you can just be you. The idea seemed to shake him more than any threat could have. That night, as Jae-won worked in his study, reviewing intel on the Jamaican syndicate, he found his thoughts drifting to Tasha, to the way she'd reached for his hand, to the trust implicit in that simple gesture. For years, he'd been untouchable, the cold, calculating boss who inspired fear and commanded respect but never affection, never genuine connection. And now this pregnant woman who should hate him, who had every reason to fear him, was looking at him like he was something more than a weapon. It terrified him. It also made him want to be the man she saw when she looked at him. His phone buzzed a message from his investigator in Jamaica. Found something. Call me. 5 minutes later, Jae-won was pacing his office, his jaw tight. You're certain? Positive, boss. John Bailey is being held in a warehouse outside Kingston. 3 guards, rotating shifts. They're keeping him alive, but just barely. And the organization behind it? That's the interesting part. It's not a Jamaican syndicate. It's a splinter group from the park organization, the same one your father crushed 20 years ago. They've been planning this for months, maybe years. Revenge. This was all about revenge. They'd use Tasha to get to him, knowing a pregnant bride would either destroy his reputation or, if he rejected her, make him look cruel and unstable. Either way, they won. Except they hadn't counted on one thing. They hadn't counted on Jaewon choosing her. "Assemble a team," he ordered. "We move in 48 hours. I want Bailey extracted, and I want everyone involved identified. No one escapes." "Yes, boss." When Jaewon emerged from his study hours later, he found Tasha curled up on the couch in the living room, reading one of the books he'd had delivered. She looked up when he entered, and something in his expression must have given him away. "What is it?" she asked, setting the book aside. "We found your father." She shot to her feet, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. "Is he?" "He's alive. Hurt, but alive. I'm getting him out." Tasha's legs gave out. She sank back onto the couch, tears streaming down her face. "When?" "2 days. My men are already positioning. I'll bring him home to you." She looked up at him with such raw gratitude it made his chest ache. "I don't know how to repay you for this. You don't owe me anything. I owe you everything." Jaewon crossed the room and knelt in front of her, a position of submission he'd never taken with anyone. "You owe me nothing. This is what I should have done from the beginning. What I would have done if I'd known the truth." Tasha reached out and cupped his face, her hands gentle against his sharp features. "You're a good man, Jaewon-seo, whether you believe it or not." He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch, and for the first time in years, Jaewon let himself feel something other than cold control. He let himself feel hope. The nightmare came on the 3rd night. Jaewon was in his study, reviewing extraction plans, when he heard the scream. He was on his feet and running before his mind fully processed the sound, his hand already reaching for the gun he kept holstered at his side. He burst into Tasha's room to find her thrashing in bed, tears streaming down her face, her hands clutching her stomach protectively even in sleep. "No, please," she sobbed. "Please don't hurt my baby. Please." "Tasha." He holstered his weapon and approached carefully. "Tasha, wake up." She didn't hear him, trapped in whatever hell her subconscious had created. Her breathing was ragged, panicked, and Jaewon knew that kind of fear, the kind that didn't disappear just because you opened your eyes. He sat on the edge of her bed and gently touched her shoulder. "Tasha, you're safe. Wake up." Her eyes flew open, wild and unfocused. For a moment, she didn't recognize him, and he saw pure terror in her expression. Then awareness returned, and she collapsed against him, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. Jaewon's arms came around her instinctively, one hand cradling her head against his chest, the other resting protectively over hers where it curved around her belly. "You're safe," he murmured into her hair. "I've got you. You're safe." "They were taking my baby," she gasped between sobs. "They were cutting. I couldn't stop them. It was a dream. Just a dream. No one is taking your baby. I won't let them." She clung to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had crumbled around her. And maybe he was. Maybe, despite everything, despite all the violence and darkness that defined him, he was the one stable point in her shattered reality. Jaewon held her until the sobs quieted, until her breathing evened out, until she finally relaxed against him. He should have left then. Should have laid her back down and returned to his study. Instead, he shifted them both so his back was against the headboard. Tasha curled into his side, her head resting on his chest. His hand never left her stomach, his palm warm against the curve where her baby grew. "Tell me something good," she whispered into the darkness. "About your life. Something that didn't involve violence." Jaewon was quiet for a long moment, searching through memories that were mostly soaked in blood. Finally, he found one. "My mother had a garden," he said quietly. "Not the one here, a real garden, at the house where I grew up. She'd spend hours there, talking to the plants like they were her children. I used to think she was crazy. And now I understand. She was trying to grow something beautiful, in a world that wanted to destroy everything soft." His voice roughened. "She died when I was 15. Cancer. Quick and brutal. My father, he never recovered. That's when everything changed." Tasha's hand found his free one, squeezing gently. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." But the pain in his voice said otherwise. "Loss doesn't care about time," she said softly. "It just sits there, waiting for quiet moments to remind you of what you've lost." He looked down at her, at this woman who'd been through hell and still found compassion for his pain. "How are you so strong?" "I'm not strong. I'm terrified every single day." "That's what makes you strong. You're terrified, and you keep going anyway." She tilted her head to look up at him, and in the dim light from the city outside, he could see the question in her eyes. The uncertainty. The growing something that neither of them wanted to name. "J1, she whispered. "What are we doing?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I'm not walking away from you. Not now. Not ever. Even though this baby isn't yours? Even though I brought nothing but trouble into your life? This baby," he said, his hand spreading wider over her stomach, "is innocent, and you brought honesty into my life. That's worth more than you know." They fell asleep like that, tangled together, his hand protective over her belly, her head resting over his heart. And when Jae-won woke in the early morning light, he found he didn't want to move. The days that followed brought changes neither of them expected. Tasha laughed for the first time. It happened in the garden. Jae-won had been telling her about one of his men, a massive, terrifying enforcer who was secretly afraid of birds. As if on cue, the white peacock his mother had loved appeared, strutting toward them with regal indifference. "Watch," Jae-won murmured. "Right on schedule." His enforcer, a man who'd broken bones without flinching, saw the bird and immediately found urgent business elsewhere. Practically running from the garden, Tasha's laugh burst out of her, bright and genuine and so unexpected it startled them both. The sound was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, and Jae-won felt something in his chest crack open at the sound. He would do anything to hear that laugh again. Their conversations deepened. Walking in the garden became their ritual, a sacred time where the outside world didn't exist. "I never wanted this life," Jae-won confessed one evening. "I wanted to be an architect, design buildings, create spaces where people could feel safe." "You still could," Tasha said. He shook his head. "This world doesn't let you leave. Once you're in until someone kills you or you kill everyone else first. That's a terrible way to live. It's the only way I know. Maybe you could learn a different way." She touched his arm gently. "You're already different than you think. Different than they say you are." "Who's they?" "Everyone. The staff whispers about you like you're a demon. Your men fear you. But I see how you check on the chef's grandmother when she's sick. I see you leaving money for the staff's families. I see the man who tends his mother's garden and talks to my baby when he thinks I'm asleep." Jae-won stopped walking, his throat tight. "You heard that?" "Every word." Her eyes were soft. "You're not the monster you pretend to be. I've killed people, Tasha. More than I can count. I've tortured men for information. I've destroyed families. That's not pretend that's who I am. That's what you've done. It's not who you are. There's no difference." "There is. And the fact that you can't see it breaks my heart." He wanted to argue. Wanted to maintain the distance that had kept him safe for years. But looking at her, at this woman who should hate him, who should fear him, but instead saw something worth protecting, he couldn't. "I don't know how to be anything else," he admitted, his voice raw. "Then maybe," she said gently, "you let me show you." That night, Tasha woke from another nightmare. This time, she didn't scream. She simply got up and walked through the quiet penthouse to Jae-won's room. She knocked softly. "Jae-won?" The door opened immediately. He stood there shirtless, his tattoos on full display, his eyes alert. "What's wrong? Is it the baby?" "No, She wrapped her arms around herself. "I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see them taking my father, hurting my baby. I know it's irrational, but it's not irrational." He stepped aside. "Come in." She hesitated. This crossed a line they'd been carefully avoiding, but the fear was stronger than propriety, and she stepped into his room. It was simpler than she'd expected, minimalist, almost austere. A large bed, a desk covered in documents, windows overlooking the city. "Lie down," he said, gesturing to the bed. "Where will you?" "I'll take the chair. I just don't want you alone right now." But when she lay down, she found herself saying, "Stay with me, please." Jae-won stood frozen for a long moment, clearly warring with himself. Finally, he nodded and lay down beside her on top of the covers, maintaining that last thread of propriety. Tasha didn't overthink it. She curled into his side, her head finding that space between his shoulder and chest that seemed made for her. His arm came around her automatically, holding her close. "Is this okay?" he asked, his voice rough. "It's perfect." They lay in silence, the city breathing around them. Tasha felt safe in a way she hadn't in months, maybe years. "Jae-won? This child will never know fear again, not while I live." She was repeating his own words back to him. That's what you said. Did you mean it? His arm tightened around her. Every word. Why? It's not your child. You have no obligation. Because, he interrupted, his voice fierce. When I look at you, when I think about this baby, I don't see obligation. I see something worth protecting. Something that matters more than contracts or alliances or any of the bullshit reasons I thought I was getting married. She tilted her head to look at him. What do you see? I see a future, a real one. Not the lonely, violent existence I've been living, but something more. He touched her face gently, his tattooed hand surprisingly tender. I see you. The air between them shifted, charged with possibility and unspoken feelings. I'm falling for you, Tasha whispered, the confession escaping before she could stop it. I know it's insane. I know it doesn't make sense. But I can't help it. Jaewon's breath caught. Tasha, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. I need you to know something too, he said, his voice strained. I'm falling for you. Have been since the night you told me the truth, and I realized you weren't my enemy. You were my responsibility, my privilege to protect. They stared at each other in the darkness, the weight of their confessions settling around them. This is complicated, Tasha said. Everything about us is complicated. What do we do about it? Jaewon pulled her closer, his hand finding its familiar place over her stomach. We take it one day at a time. We keep you safe. We get your father back. And then, he paused, then we figure out what this is, what we are. What if people don't accept it? Your men, your organization. Then they'll learn to accept it. Or they'll deal with me. His voice turned hard. You're mine to protect now, Tasha. That's not negotiable. She should have been afraid of that possessiveness. Instead, it made her feel cherished. They fell asleep tangled together. And when Jaewon woke with his hand resting protectively on her growing belly, the baby moving beneath his palm for the first time, everything shifted permanently inside him. This wasn't duty. This wasn't obligation. This was love. And Jaewon, who'd spent his entire life believing himself incapable of such things, finally understood what he'd been missing. The call came at 3 a.m. We've confirmed John Bailey's location, Jaewon's lead investigator said. But boss, there's a problem. They're moving him tomorrow. If we don't extract him now, we lose our window. Jaewon was already moving, pulling on tactical gear with practiced efficiency. Assemble the team. We leave in 30 minutes. Boss, the intel suggests they're expecting something. There are more guards than usual, and they've fortified the warehouse. I don't care if they've built a fortress. We're bringing him home. After ending the call, Jaewon stood in his room, strapping weapons to his body with mechanical precision. A gun at his hip, another at his ankle, knives in concealed sheaths. This was who he really was, not the man who walked gardens and spoke softly to pregnant women, but the killer who'd built an empire on violence. Jaewon? He spun to find Tasha in his doorway, her eyes wide as she took in his tactical gear and weapons. What's happening? She asked. We found your father's exact location, but they're moving him tomorrow, so I'm leaving now. Fear and hope warred in her expression. You're going yourself? Yes, but if something happens, nothing will happen. He crossed to her, his hands gentle despite the weapons strapped to his body. I'm bringing your father home, I promise. Let someone else go. Please, you don't have to. Yes, I do. His voice was firm. This is my responsibility. My fight. I won't send my men into danger I'm not willing to face myself. She grabbed his tactical vest, her fingers clutching the thick fabric. What if they kill you? They won't. You can't know that. Tasha, I can't lose you. The words burst out of her, raw and desperate. I know I don't have the right to ask you to stay. I know this is what you do. But I can't lose you. Not now. Not when I'm finally starting to believe that maybe, her voice broke. Maybe I get to be happy. Jaewon cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. I'm coming back. Nothing in hell or on earth could keep me from coming back to you. Promise me. I promise. He kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. I'm bringing your father home. And then we're ending this. All of it. She wrapped her arms around him, careful of the weapons, and held on like he was her anchor in a storm. Be careful, please. Always. He pulled back to look at her, memorizing every detail of her face. Stay in the secure room. Don't open the door for anyone except my most trusted men. Understood? She nodded. Good. He kissed her forehead again, then stepped away before he could change his mind. "I'll be back before you know it." The flight to Jamaica was tense. Jaewon sat in the private jet surrounded by his most skilled operatives, men who'd been with him through countless battles. They checked weapons, reviewed building schematics, and maintained the focused silence of professionals preparing for war. "Boss," his second-in-command said quietly. "The intel also identified who's behind this. It's the Park Splinter faction, like we suspected. But there's more. They've partnered with a Korean-Jamaican hybrid syndicate. This was always about revenge for what your father did to their organization 20 years ago. How many men are we facing?" "At least 15 guarding the warehouse. Maybe more in reserve. 15 against 6. Not great odds, but Jaewon had survived worse." "Rules of engagement?" one of his men asked. "Anyone who gets between us and John Bailey dies. No exceptions. No mercy." Jaewon's voice was cold, deadly. "They used an innocent woman and her unborn child as weapons. They don't deserve mercy." The warehouse sat on the outskirts of Kingston, a rusted industrial building surrounded by overgrown vegetation. Jaewon and his team approached under cover of darkness, their movements silent and precise. He signaled his men to positions, 2 on the roof for overwatch, 2 covering the exits, the rest with him for the primary breach. "On my mark," he whispered into his comm. 3, 2, 1, execute." They moved as one. The doors exploded inward. Jaewon led the charge, his gun raised, his movements fluid and lethal. The guards inside scrambled for weapons, but they were too slow. Jaewon dropped 3 men before they could even aim. His team fanned out, eliminating threats with brutal efficiency. Gunfire echoed through the warehouse, the muzzle flashes painting the darkness in strobe light violence. "Clear left. Clear right. Second floor, 2 targets down." Jaewon moved deeper into the building, his instincts guiding him. There, a reinforced door at the back. That's where they'd keep a high-value prisoner. He kicked it open. John Bailey hung from chains attached to the ceiling, his body battered and broken but alive. His eyes widened when he saw Jaewon. "Who?" "I'm Jaewon Seo, your son-in-law." Jaewon shot the locks on the chains, catching John as he fell. "Tasha sent me." "Tasha?" Hope flared in John's eyes despite his pain. "Is she?" "She's safe. She's waiting for you." Gunfire erupted behind them. Jaewon spun, putting his body between John and the door, his gun already firing. 2 guards went down, but more were coming. "Can you walk?" he demanded. "I'll crawl if I have to." "Good enough." Jaewon half-carried, half-dragged John toward the exit, his team providing covering fire. They fought their way out of the warehouse, leaving bodies in their wake. "Extract vehicle approaching," his driver called over the comm. They burst out of the building just as an armored SUV screeched to a stop. Jaewon shoved John inside, then turned back as more guards poured out of the warehouse. The leader, a man Jaewon recognized from the Park organization's old files, stepped forward with a gun raised. "You're dead, Seo. You and that whore you call a wife." Jaewon's shot took him between the eyes before he could finish the sentence. "Anyone else want to insult my wife?" Jaewon called out, his voice deadly calm. The remaining guards hesitated, seeing their leader's body crumpled on the ground. "I didn't think so." Jaewon backed toward the SUV, his gun never wavering. "Tell whoever's left of your organization that Tasha Bailey is under my protection. Anyone who threatens her, her father, or her child will end up like your boss. Understood?" Silence. "I said understood," muttered agreements. Jaewon climbed into the SUV, and they roared away into the night, leaving the warehouse burning behind them. On the plane back to Seoul, a medic worked on John's injuries while Jaewon stood at the window, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and red. His knuckles were bleeding again, not from punching walls this time, but from fighting for something that mattered, for someone who mattered. "Mr. Seo?" He turned. John sat upright now, bandaged but alive, his eyes sharp despite his ordeal. "Thank you," John said quietly, "for saving me, for protecting my daughter. I didn't do it for thanks." "I know. You did it because you love her." Jaewon stiffened. "Is it that obvious? To a father?" "Yes." John managed a small smile. "She called me, you know, before they took my phone. Told me about the pregnancy, about the marriage she was being forced into. She was terrified. But in our last conversation, she said something that gave me hope." "What?" She said, "Maybe the monster they're making me marry will be kinder than the monsters who are forcing me." John's eyes softened. Looks like she was right. Jaewon didn't know what to say to that. "Take care of her," John continued. "And that baby. They deserve better than this world has given them." "I will." It wasn't a promise, it was a vow. I'll protect them both, with my life if necessary. When they landed in Seoul, Jae-won called ahead. Prepare the medical wing, have Dr. Kim ready, and tell Tasha her father is coming home. The SUV pulled up to the penthouse, just as dawn broke over the city. Jae-won helped John out, supporting him as they took the elevator up. The doors opened. Tasha stood in the hallway, her hand pressed to her mouth, tears already streaming down her face. "Papa?" she whispered. "Baby girl," John croaked. She ran to him, carefully avoiding his injuries as she wrapped her arms around him. They held each other, crying, while Jae-won stepped back to give them privacy. But Tasha reached out, grabbing his blood-stained hand and pulling him into the embrace. "Thank you," she sobbed against his chest. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Jae-won's arms came around both of them, protecting, sheltering. This was his family now. Later that night, after John had been treated and was resting comfortably, Tasha found Jae-won on the balcony. He'd showered, changed, but the tension of battle still lingered in his shoulders. "Hey," she said softly. He turned. "Hey!" She walked to him, her eyes taking in every detail: the fresh bruises, the cut above his eyebrow, the exhaustion in his eyes. "You came back. I promised I would. You kept your promise." She reached up, touching his face gently. "You always keep your promises." "Tasha, I love you," she interrupted, the words tumbling out. "I know it's fast. I know it's complicated. I know we're still figuring this out. But I love you, Jae-won-so. I love the way you protect people. I love the way you talk to my baby. I love the way you make me feel safe. I love you." Jae-won's control, already fractured, finally shattered completely. He pulled her to him and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, like he was afraid she might break. But when she kissed him back, her arms winding around his neck, gentle became passionate, became desperate, became everything they'd been holding back for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jae-won rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too," he whispered. "I didn't think I could love anyone. But you're everything. Show me," she whispered back. He understood what she was asking, what she was offering. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." He swept her into his arms, carrying her to his bedroom not as a transaction, not as an obligation, but as a choice. Their real first night, slow, gentle, consensual, emotional. Two broken people choosing each other, healing each other, loving each other. When it was over, they lay tangled together, her head on his chest, his hand resting protectively on her belly where their baby grew. "This is real," she whispered in wonder. "This is real," he confirmed. Their genuine marriage had finally begun. 3 months later, Tasha stood at the bedroom window, watching Seoul wake up beneath a blanket of fresh snow. Her hand rested on her now prominent belly, 6 months pregnant and showing it proudly. Behind her, Jae-won stirred in bed. "Come back," he murmured sleepily. She smiled, returning to curl into his side. His hand immediately found her stomach, a gesture so automatic now it was like breathing. "Did you sleep?" she asked. "Better than I have in years." He kissed her temple. "You?" "The baby kept me up. I think she's practicing martial arts in there." "She?" Jae-won's eyes lit up. "You think it's a girl?" "Just a feeling." Tasha covered his hand with hers. "Would you be disappointed?" "Disappointed? To have a little girl who looks like you?" He laughed, the sound warm and genuine, so different from the cold, controlled man she'd married. "I'd be the luckiest man alive." Their life had transformed. John had recovered and now lived in a secure apartment Jae-won had purchased nearby. He visited daily, watching with growing respect as the Mafia boss treated his daughter like precious treasure. The penthouse felt like a home now, not a prison. Tasha had filled it with plants and color and life. The staff smiled when she walked by. Even Jae-won's hardened men had softened around her, treating her with genuine respect rather than fearful deference. But not everything was perfect. The syndicate leaders had noticed the changes in their boss, noticed how much time he spent with his pregnant wife, noticed how protective he'd become. And some of them, the old guard, the ones who believed in the traditional ways, saw it as weakness. The whispers had started weeks ago. "The boss is distracted. He's going soft. His wife carries another man's bastard." Jae-won had ignored them. Until today, the emergency meeting was called for noon. Every major leader in the CO syndicate would be there, allies and enemies alike, all wearing the same false smiles. "I don't like this," Tasha said as Jae-won dressed in a sharp black suit. "It feels like a trap." "It probably is." He checked his gun, sliding it into the holster at his side. But I need to end this. The whispers, the challenges to my authority, it all ends today. Let me come with you. Absolutely not. His voice was firm. You and the baby stay here where it's safe. Jaewon. He cupped her face in his hands. I love you. Both of you. Which is why I need you to trust me and stay here. She wanted to argue, but the determination in his eyes stopped her. Promise me you'll come back. Always. He kissed her deeply, pouring every ounce of love into it. Always. The meeting room was tense. 15 syndicate leaders sat around the long table, their faces ranging from supportive to openly hostile. Jaewon took his seat at the head, his expression cold and controlled, the boss they all recognized. Gentlemen, he began. We're here to address concerns about my leadership. Concerns is a polite word, Park Ji-hoon sneered. He was old guard, a man who'd served under Jaewon's father. We're here to discuss your weakness, your distraction, your pregnant wife who carries another man's child. The room went silent. Jaewon's expression didn't change. Continue. You spend more time playing house than running this organization. You've gone soft. And that baby, that bastard your wife is carrying, you treat it like it's yours. It's embarrassing. Embarrassing, Jaewon repeated softly. Tell me, Park, what do you suggest I do? Park leaned forward, emboldened by Jaewon's calm. Send her away. Annul the marriage. Find a proper wife who can give you legitimate heirs. Restore your reputation. I see. Jaewon stood slowly, his movements deliberate. Anyone else share Park's opinion? 3 other leaders raised their hands. Not many, but enough to be dangerous. Interesting. Jaewon walked around the table, his footsteps echoing in the silent room. Let me make something very clear. Tasha is my wife. The child she carries is under my protection, which makes that child my heir, regardless of biology. That's not how it works, Park started. That's exactly how it works. Jaewon's voice cracked like a whip. I am the boss. I make the rules, and I say that baby is my heir. The others won't accept it. Then they can challenge me. Jaewon stopped directly behind Park's chair, his presence menacing. Right here. Right now. Anyone who questions my authority, who insults my wife, who threatens my child, step forward and face me. Silence. No one? Jaewon's smile was deadly. How disappointing. You're making a mistake, Park muttered. The only mistake I've made, Jaewon said coldly, was tolerating your disrespect this long. He pulled out his gun and placed it on the table in front of Park. The man paled. Pick it up, Jaewon commanded. What? You think I'm weak? Prove it. Pick up the gun. Challenge me. Let's settle this right now. Park's hand trembled as it reached for the weapon. The entire room held its breath, but Park couldn't do it. Couldn't pick up that gun and face the killer in Jaewon's eyes. He pulled his hand back. That's what I thought. Jaewon took his gun back, holstering it. Let me be very clear. Tasha Bailey is my wife. The child she carries is my heir. Anyone who questions this, anyone who threatens them, will answer to me personally, and we all know how that ends. He looked around the room, meeting each man's eyes. This organization was built on loyalty and strength. I have both. What I also have now is something to protect beyond myself. That doesn't make me weak, it makes me more dangerous than I've ever been. Because now I'm not just fighting for power, I'm fighting for family. The room remained silent. Meeting adjourned. The leaders filed out, most looking chastened. Park left last, his face dark with humiliation but notably alive. Jaewon's second in command lingered. Boss, that was risky. Park has allies. Let them come. I'm done apologizing for loving my wife. When Jaewon returned to the penthouse, he found Tasha pacing anxiously. She ran to him the moment he entered. What happened? I made it very clear where I stand. He pulled her close. The baby is mine. You're mine. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. Jaewon, that's not. It is safe. It's the only way. I won't hide what we have. I won't pretend I'm ashamed of you or this baby. Tears filled her eyes. You could lose everything. I already have everything. Right here. He placed his hand on her belly, where the baby kicked strongly. This is what matters. Not power. Not reputation. You. This baby. Our family. That evening, they held a small dinner, just Tasha, Jaewon, and John. The older man watched his daughter and son-in-law with knowing eyes. You really love her, John said quietly during a moment when Tasha was in the kitchen. More than life itself, Jaewon admitted. And the baby? Is mine in every way that matters. John smiled. Then you have my blessing. Not that you need it. I do need it. You're her father. Your opinion matters. My opinion is that my daughter has never been happier, and that's all a father can ask for. Later that night, as they lay in bed, the baby kicking actively between them, Tasha asked the question that had been haunting her. What if people never accept this? What if they always see this baby as illegitimate? Jaewon was quiet for a long moment, his hand tracing patterns on her belly. Then they'll learn, he said finally. Or they'll leave. But this baby, our baby, will grow up knowing she's loved, wanted, protected. That's all that matters. She? Tasha smiled through her tears. You keep saying she. I have a feeling. He kissed her stomach gently. A little girl with your eyes and your strength and your incredible heart. And your protectiveness and your loyalty and your terrible habit of solving problems with violence. He laughed. I'll work on that last one. 2 months later, at 8 months pregnant, Tasha accompanied Jaewon to a formal syndicate gathering. She'd wanted to stay home, but he'd insisted not to show her off, but to make a statement. She wore an elegant dress that accommodated her very pregnant belly and stood beside him with quiet dignity as leaders from across Asia arrived for the annual summit. And then it happened. A rival boss from a competing organization made the mistake of questioning the baby's legitimacy within Jaewon's hearing. Tell me, the man said loudly, clearly drunk. How does it feel to raise another man's bastard, Seo? The room went silent. Jaewon stood slowly, his expression deadly calm. Tasha grabbed his hand, feeling the tension in his body, but he squeezed her fingers gently, a silent promise not to lose control. This child, Jaewon said, his voice carrying through the silent room, is my heir. My blood or not, she is mine. And anyone who questions that is questioning my authority. But, my heir. Each word was a hammer blow. I claim this child as mine. I claim her mother as my wife, my partner, my equal. And anyone who insults them, insults me directly. He looked around the room, his gaze settling on each leader. This baby will be born in 2 weeks. She will be raised with every privilege, every protection, every advantage my position can provide. She will be safe, loved, and untouchable. Not because of whose blood runs in her veins, but because she is mine. Gasps rippled through the room. Jaewon pulled Tasha to her feet, his arm around her protectively. Her name will be Seo. She will be my daughter, and she will inherit everything I've built. The rival boss who'd started this opened his mouth to argue. Unless, Jaewon continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, you'd like to challenge my decision? I'm happy to step outside and settle this the traditional way. The man paled and shook his head. Good. Jaewon helped Tasha back to her seat. Then this matter is closed. Later, in their car heading home, Tasha sobbed against his shoulder. You just made yourself a target, she cried. For me, for a baby that isn't even yours. She is mine, Jaewon interrupted fiercely. She's been mine since the moment you told me you were pregnant. Since the moment I chose to protect you instead of reject you. Biology is irrelevant. But your men will accept it, or they'll find new employment. She pulled back to look at him, awe in her eyes. How can you be so sure? Because power recognizes conviction, and I have never been more certain of anything in my life. He wiped her tears gently. This baby is mine, Tasha. Our baby. Our daughter. And I will fight the entire world to protect her. 2 weeks later, Tasha went into labor. It happened in the middle of the night. Jaewon woke to her gasping his name. Her water broken, contractions already close together. It's time, she panted. The baby's coming. Jaewon moved with controlled efficiency, calling the doctor, the medical team, getting her to the prepared medical wing of the penthouse. But inside, he was terrified. What if something went wrong? What if he lost her? Lost the baby? The labor was long and difficult. 17 hours of Tasha gripping his hand so hard his bones ground together, of him whispering encouragement and love, of watching her suffer and being unable to do anything but be present. I can't, she sobbed at hour 15. I can't do this anymore. Yes, you can. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her hands. You're the strongest person I know. You can do this. I'm scared. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. Finally, the doctor said. One more push. Tasha screamed, squeezing Jaewon's hand. And then, a baby's cry filled the room. It's a girl, the doctor announced, tears in his eyes. A girl, their daughter. The doctor cleaned her quickly and placed her in Tasha's arms. She was perfect, tiny, and wrinkled and screaming her outrage at the world, with a shock of dark hair and skin, the beautiful blend of her mother's warmth. Oh my God! Tasha sobbed, staring down at her daughter. She's perfect. Jaewon looked at the baby, this tiny human who'd changed everything, and felt his heart crack wide open. Can I? He asked hesitantly. Tasha placed their daughter in his arms. The baby immediately quieted, her tiny eyes dark like his, trying to focus on his face. One perfect hand wrapped around his finger, gripping with surprising strength. And in that moment, Jaewon Seo, the cold, feared Mafia boss who'd built an empire on violence, completely fell apart. He cried, openly, unashamedly, tears streaming down his face as he held his daughter. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I'm your father, and I promise you, you will never know fear, never know pain, never know anything but love." The baby made a small sound, like she understood. "What should we name her?" Tasha asked softly. Jaewon thought for a moment, still staring at his daughter's perfect face. "Hope. Her name is Hope." "Hope Seo," Tasha tested. "It's perfect." Later that night, after Tasha had fallen asleep exhausted, Jaewon sat in the rocking chair holding Hope. She slept peacefully in his arms, completely trusting. He thought about everything that had led to this moment. The contract marriage, the terrifying wedding night, the confession that should have ended everything but instead began it. "Your mother was so scared when she told me about you," he whispered to Hope. "She thought I'd reject her. Reject you. But the truth is, that night, the night she told me she was pregnant, my life didn't end." He kissed his daughter's forehead gently. It began. The door opened quietly. Tasha stood there, watching them, her eyes soft. "Come here," Jaewon said. She joined them, curling into his side, and together they watched their daughter sleep. Outside, Seoul glittered with morning light. Inside, a family that shouldn't have existed, built on deception and fear and impossible choices, had found something rare and precious. They'd found love. Real, genuine, unshakable love. And nothing, not rival syndicates, not tradition, not biology, not the entire world could take that away from them. Thank you for following Jaewon and Tasha's journey from a forced marriage to genuine love. Their story proves that sometimes the most broken people find each other at exactly the right moment, and that family isn't always about blood, it's about choice, protection, and unwavering love. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel for more intense romance stories that'll keep you up at night. The next video is already waiting on your screen, don't leave yet. Click it now to continue the journey. And drop a comment below. Would you have given Jaewon a second chance? Team Tasha or Team Hope? Let me know where you're watching from. Someone once told me stories like this don't matter anymore. But you're here, which means they were wrong. Let's prove them wrong together. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of story lovers. See you in the next one.